Joining me now to discuss this is Tom Mueller, author of Crisis of Conscience, Whistleblowing in an Age of Fraud. Welcome.
Thank you, Joe.
So if this second person does come forward, do you think that this was propelled specifically by the first whistleblower here?
Very definitely. In many of the stories that I tell in my book, an initial person stepping forward gives permission to others to say, yeah, I saw that same conduct. Quite often we see a group of people watching the same event unfold, and many of them kind of know, okay, this is wrong, but only one is willing to take the risk of stepping forward. Once they do that, there are two camps, one that attack them, retaliate against them, and another that joins them and says, yep, that's the right thing to do. And I think that's what we're seeing here today.
You've described whistleblowing as a very painstaking experience where an effective whistleblower stays below the radar, keeps collecting information, must have staying power, and an ability to remain inconspicuous. Walk me through why these traits are also critical to being an effective whistleblower.
Yeah, effective means at the end of the day that you make a difference, that you fix the problem. That's what all whistleblowers are focused on, and their greatest fear is that they don't make their voices heard. So staying under the radar means you can continue to gather information and you're not targeted, you're not identified as the whistleblower, as the problem. Being painstaking and methodical means you're gathering data that can be used in an investigation and a prosecution. It's the kind of thing that, ideally you are not. You remain anonymous the entire time. That's what really makes you most effective in this kind of situation. Sometimes, however, coming forward, for instance, speaking before Congress, gives that voice an extra, reverberation and power that pushes you over the edge and actually gets change made.
It's clear, though, there's consequences to being a whistleblower, and the president has made it very clear he wants to find out who the first whistleblower is. And in Politico, you wrote recently, if history is any indication, the current whistleblower might end up regretting coming forward altogether. What did you mean by that in this current context?
Well, and time again in the stories I've told in my book, you see someone do the right thing, come forward, prove beyond the shadow of a doubt serious harm or serious fraud, and then be brutally retaliated against by their organization, whether that be ostracism, almost tragicomic things like being immediately moved to an office in the basement next to the toilet between two loud photocopiers, symbolic ritual humiliation by their organization. Then, of course, they're fired. Quite often they will be criminally investigated by their organization. They are blackballed in their chosen line of work and will never work again. So these are major consequences. Someone in the agency who is calling out the commander-in-chief and accusing him of serious wrongdoing is really putting not only their career but their lives on the line. If we were to listen to Trump's references to spies and rubbing them out.
What can we learn from the past whistleblowers who have come forward? You've got Daniel Ellsberg, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, about what could happen in this particular case.
Well, I think the fundamental power here is, and the really uplifting moment when you look at this sort of situation, is that an individual with good facts and courage and a real backbone can come forward and tell the world about wrongdoing and face and sometimes prevail against a multinational corporation or a vastly powerful government agency. One person, the David and Goliath, can succeed. What we also see, however, though, is that the long-term career problems and the long-term life problems. Many of the whistleblowers I've talked with have permanent emotional scars. They're glad they did what they did, and they couldn't live with themselves not having done it, but they really have paid a deep price. And I think society needs to thank not only the whistleblowers for what they do in the moment, but also to think long-term. How do we make them whole in the longer arena, because they really are in harm's way, and this particular person is in harm's way in a way that could actually turn into be physical violence.
Yeah, there's been a lot of concern about the physical security of the first whistleblower, and I think a lot about what it might mean for the second whistleblower. But this is also a White House that is complaining a lot about leaks, and this is also a very leaky White House, just by the facts. And a New Yorker article brings up the difference between leaking and whistleblowing, and we've seen that this has been a leaky White House. So one thing that is mentioned is that there was that anonymous column. Remember that a while ago about someone standing as part of the resistance. Were in the administration. What do you think about that? I mean, what's more effective here, whistleblowing or leaking? And how do we make sure we understand the difference here? Because there's just been so much news constantly out of the White House.
That's such a good question, Joe, and it's critical to understand. The first, this anonymous op-ed that was published in the New York Times, that's really a self-serving announcement. Someone who is not willing to step up and make charges, they're basically saying, we're the deep state, we're going to continue to subvert the commander-in-chief in his governing, which to me that's treasonous. I mean, that is wrong. I'm glad that there's an adult in the room with Trump. However, I'm not good with an unelected shadow government pulling strings in the background. That's fundamentally wrong. This was, I'm going to say, CIA whistleblower, because thanks to the New York Times, they didn't out that anonymous op-ed writer, but they did partially out this real whistleblower. And I think we have to have a conversation about the press as well here and what they're able to do or what they should be doing with whistleblower identity. But this person has followed the rules all the way along. Acting DNI Director McGuire said he followed the rules every step of the way, followed the law every step of the way. And has come forward with serious allegations, very carefully documented. That 9-page disclosure is a work of art. In terms of creating a roadmap for prosecutors, for investigators to follow, to really determine whether there's been wrongdoing here, who are the witnesses to it, where the documents are. This is a completely different animal, and they're willing to testify before Congress. This anonymous person, telling us that the deep state has got your back, that for me is very dangerous and a bad precedent for our democracy. This whistleblower coming forward and saying, we need to fix this, that's democracy in action. This is a patriot.
And that's the difference. Okay, Tom Mueller, author of the new book, Crisis of Conscious Whistleblowing in an Age of Fraud. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. It's been great.